The Seventh Tower by Garth Nix. Book 3, Einar. Chapter 21. It took Tal and Adras all night to fly to Four Rivers Meet. They had to make frequent stops for Tal to massage his arms and rotate his shoulders. Eventually, Adras had to actually carry Tal, the Storm Shepherd's arms wrapped completely around the chosen boy. It was somewhat humiliating, but Tal had long since given up caring about that. He was merely glad that it didn't hurt. They sighted Four Rivers Meet shortly after dawn. At least Tal presumed that's what it was. Certainly he could see four rivers flowing in from north, south, east, and west to meet in a crazy four-way delta of black mud and thousands of channels that made no sense to Tal. How could four rivers all flow into the same patchwork of channels? The four deltas should end in a lake, but they didn't. At least one of the rivers should be flowing the other way, but none did. The rivers just kept on spreading and dividing, their many fingers stretching across a wide plain. A completely flat plain, Tal thought at first. But then, as the sun rose higher, he saw that there was something in the very middle of the delta. A mountain, surrounded on all sides by narrow streams and reedy islets. None of it made sense. The water from the four rivers had to go somewhere, but the mountain was sitting where a lake should be. Tal looked away and blinked, and then looked back. But everything was still there. A huge mass of gray stone in the middle of a vast channel network that couldn't possibly work. That's Einar, Tal told himself. Einarian magic.
Adras!
Adras exclaimed. He started to point, but remembered that he was cradling Tal, and stopped. Tal looked down. There was a ship below them, moving quite quickly along one of the larger channels. It sparkled in the morning sun, and Tal's trained eye picked up the glint of sunstones. Many sunstones. He could see a dot on the deck that he presumed was Mila, and Adras was quite clearly the cloud that was twined about the mast. There was something else moving on deck, too. Something small. Tal couldn't see what it was at that distance. Adras started to descend. Tal closed his eyes and tried to think of what he was going to say to Mila. Would it help if he apologized? Did Icecarls apologize? Or would she just think less of him? Should he try and stun her with a blue slap before she could do anything to him? He wasn't afraid, exactly. He just felt terrible. No matter how he tried, he simply couldn't think of Mila as someone whose life didn't matter. Then he felt a bump, as if they'd hit something solid, and he opened his eyes. They hadn't hit anything, but Adras was suddenly climbing, very quickly. Adras! Tal shouted in sudden panic. What are you doing? We're supposed to be going down.
Updraft.
Adras boomed.
A hot air current, too strong for me to fly against. I am only a cloud.
What? Tal screamed. Desperately, he tried to think of something he could do. They were rising so rapidly that he was beginning to feel faint. They must already be thousands of stretches up, as high as the Seven Towers back on the Dark World. Far too high to build a stairway of light. How do we get down? He shouted.
When the air cools, we will fall,
Adras roared.
Have patience.
But I can't breathe, gasped Tal. Adras was silent. Tal had already noticed that his Storm Shepherd companion had trouble when he had to think new thoughts or consider how other beings lived. Cool air, he thought. Somehow he had to make the air cooler. But how? He could make it hotter with his sunstone, but not cooler. Then it came to him. Adras! He shouted. The shout took most of his breath, and the next words came out as little more than a whisper. Rain! Rain will make it cooler!
What?
Rain!
Ah, rain!
Bellowed Adras. He swung his arms forward so quickly Tal thought he was about to be thrown off into space, but he was only shifting him out of the way. The rest of his cloud body roiled and rippled, spreading out into a broad circular shape and becoming even puffier. The cloud grew blacker. Tal rolled onto his side so he could see. He could already smell the fresh scent of rain, and the temperature dropped several degrees. It got colder still, and there was a hideous grinding noise inside the Storm Shepherd. Tal saw flecks of white appearing in the darkness of the cloud. Then, large chunks of ice started to fall. Very large chunks of ice. In fact, gigantic hailstones the size of Tal's head. Some were thrown out at a sharp angle, narrowly missing the boy as he twisted and turned in the Storm Shepherd's arms. With the hailstones, the temperature dropped to freezing. Slowly, at first, the Storm Shepherd began to fall. "I said rain!" shouted Tal as they fell faster and faster. "Mila's down there somewhere, you idiot! She could get killed by a hailstone!" Then the cold really took effect, and Cloud and Boy dropped as fast as the hailstones.
"Sorry!"
boomed Adras. "Slow down!" shrieked Tal, but his voice was lost in the rush of their descent. He was shivering uncontrollably now, the chill of the wind making the icy temperature even lower. He felt as cold as he ever had out on the ice. But now he had a sunstone, Tal thought. Several, in fact. He hadn't really had time to examine the ones he'd taken from Hazwar, and he wasn't going to start while he was dropping like a stone from the sky. Tal held out his hand. His fingers were already blue, and he could hardly feel them, but the sunstone glinted there. He focused on it, willing it to warm the air around his body. At first, he thought he'd failed. It was one of the simplest spells that almost any chosen child could perform with a sunstone, but he was still freezing. Then he realized that he just couldn't feel the heat because the cold was so intense. He'd have to increase the amount of heat the sunstone put out. He concentrated again and felt a wave of heat come off the top of the sunstone and blow back around him. Some went into Adras as well. They were still falling almost straight down. Tal risked a look, but his eyes instantly filled with tears from the rushing wind. Even through teary eyes, he could see that the river was very close. Tal told the sunstone to put out even more heat, but there was a limit to the amount it could radiate outward without heating up the ring and burning his finger. Waves of hot air billowed off it, but it was not enough to counteract the cold.
"Hang on!"
yelled Adras, and the Storm Shepherd reared back. Their vertical descent turned into a long glide. They were still dropping, but now it looked like there was a slight chance they would pull up before smacking into a channel or one of the muddy islands. But they didn't. Adras roared, and Tal shouted as the water loomed closer and closer. Tal just had time to take a deep breath, a breath that was knocked out of him a second later as they hit the water. Storm Shepherd and Chosen Boy went under. A long way underwater, and actually into the mud of the river floor. Tal found himself trapped, not only by Adras's arms, but also by sticky mud that refused to let go. He couldn't breathe, and he couldn't see. He flailed his arms and his legs as he tried to break free. His whole mind was filled with panic. He just wanted to take a breath. He had to breathe. He just had to suck something into his lungs, even if it was water.